Niger's military leader, General Abdurrahmane Chiani, has ordered the immediate expulsion of Chinese corporations from the country. The companies, Soraz, CNPC and WAPCO, have been given exactly 48 hours, starting March 12, 2025, to cease operations and leave Niger's soil. This decision is not arbitrary. It is a necessary step in the fight to restore Niger's economic sovereignty. The government has accused these corporations of blatant disregard for the laws and interests of the Nigerian people. Despite Ordinance No. 2024-34, adopted on August 2, 2024, to ensure Niger's wealth benefits its own citizens, these companies have persistently refused to implement fair wages for local workers, sidelined Nigerian suppliers and contracts, ignored local industries, failed to invest in the training and promotion of Nigerian workers, and deliberately withheld technology transfers that could strengthen national industries.
Welcome to another episode of Awakening Podcast, where you get a Chinese perspective on global geopolitical events. For the first time on this channel, we are going to talk about Africa. Not a good piece of news, however, not from China's point of view. March is a difficult month for China. The Niger military government early this month expelled 3 Chinese oil executives and seized Chinese-owned assets worth over $5 billion, including key oil fields and infrastructures. In addition, I believe the Niger government also took over a 4-star Chinese hotel that used mostly to house Chinese employees during their visit. There's a lot of interesting things to discuss here, so let's get started. I wanted to start first with Niger's reason for its action. According to Niger's military government, there's a salary dispute in which local complained that Chinese employees earning an average of $8,000 per month, while the Nigerian counterpart in equivalent position received only about $1,200 per month, and the Chinese party is not willing to address the inequality. In addition, Nigeria's government said that the Chinese companies failed to comply with a 2024 amendment to mining codes, which kind of promotes the use of local goods, local contractors, and so on. The government requests that companies prioritize Nigerian subcontractor when possible, which I guess the Chinese did not comply in the exact word. Also, the new Nigeria government said the Chinese failed to pay back tax worth around $100 million. And just to be fair to my Niger and African friends here, the greater context of this is the centuries of resources plundering and slavery and also oppression by mainly European Western countries, in which the new Nigeria government claimed to stand against these foreign powers in order to protect Nigeria's national interests. And this dispute with the Chinese seems to be along that line. That's roughly the perspective of the Nigeria's government. But the Chinese take on this is completely different, and the China government is very upset this time. Now, to the Chinese, this is a total betrayal of relationship, trust. In fact, if the situation is not reversed, if the Niger government does not return those Chinese-owned assets, this will be the biggest foreign investment loss in the entire Chinese nation's history. The Chinese government here, or the Chinese oil company, the China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, has been engaging and investing in Nigeria for over 22 years. 22 years, okay? It started back in 1999. The construction of the pipeline, which goes through the Benin Republic to reach the ocean, took almost 12 years to complete. It began back in 2011. And for audience who are not familiar with the crude oil business, oil reserve is meaningless without pipeline to reach the sea, in which it can then be transported through special freighters around the world. The cost of the project is roughly around 5 billion US dollars, which does not even include many foreign assistance and other investment Chinese government gave to Niger over the decades. To give you guys a reference, Niger's entire annual GDP is around 15 billion. Just to show you guys how big this project is in comparison to Niger's economy.
Enough is enough. This move sends a clear message to foreign investors. Niger's resources belong to Nigerians. Investment is welcome, but not at the cost of exploitation and neo-colonial theft.
Now, for people who suggest that Chinese have been robbing oil off of poor Niger, the daily production of Niger's oil field is only about 90,000 barrels. And since the completion of the pipeline in 2023, Niger is able to export 14 million barrels of oil, which is barely anything if you compare to, let's say, Saudi Arabia, who export around 14 million barrels in every 2 days. It took Niger about 1 year to export that much, and 22 years of negotiation, development, and investment by the Chinese here, okay? So if you do the math here, even if all the oil profit goes to China, like Niger gets nothing, and we exclude any interest payment, time spent on this project, it would take China at least 2 to 3 years robbing, Niger's oil in order to break even with the investment. And if you take into account, interest payment, transportation fees, different kind of overhead costs, it will be at least 4 to 5 years for China to recover the investment. From the Chinese point of view, the story began over a year ago, back in July 26, 2023. The military general Tachini seized power by overthrowing the Niger official government in a coup. Following the military takeover, the European Union and the United States freezed the bank account of Niger and sanctioned the country. Niger's new government quickly ran out of cash to run the country, and the Chinese government stepped in to provide assistance with, I think, a 400 million US dollar loan. You can call it a loan or you can call it prepayment for oil profit over the coming years. But when the loan payment due date arrived, the Niger military government was not able to come up with the payment, or does not want to come up with the payment. I'm not sure what. Instead, it decided to confiscate all the facility and infrastructure Chinese built there over the years and expel some Chinese officials. So, from the Chinese perspective, the salary inequality, the missing tax payment, those are just excuses the Nigeria government used to not pay the loan and seize the Chinese assets for themselves. Now, I want to be transparent with my channel and get the Chinese domestic narrative out in the open so you get a realistic conversation of how Chinese people think, okay? From the Chinese point of view, Central Africa is one of the riskiest places to invest on the entire planet, mainly due to the lack of infrastructure and political instability. There are fair amount of resources there, but it is not accessible unless foreigners go in and build its own logistics. This means that to profit from the resources, it requires long-term investment, which is extremely risky. Traditionally, only European colonial power is willing to go there, and they do it with military force and often with religious soft power influence projection, which is a direction I would say today's China is not willing to take. For people who refer to China also as a colonial power in Africa, I kindly disagree. Let me make my point here. China is currently the biggest investor in Africa, bigger than the entire Europe, Russia, and US combined, I believe. Also, China is the biggest trade partner of Africa, more than Europe, US, and Russia combined. And China did this with barely any meaningful military footprint on the continent. Also, China do not control global financial system, so China is also not imposing this kind of neo-colonial financial colonialism on the African countries. We do not force any African countries to buy our goods or sign infrastructure contracts. They do it because we consistently offer them the best deals they cannot get from anybody else. I'm sure there are Chinese companies who conduct questionable business practices in Africa, but that's common in business dealings and shouldn't be considered as this kind of colonialism. And the case we're talking about here is run by CNPC, Chinese state-owned oil company. They carry the Chinese national image here, so it is difficult for me to imagine serious foul play here by the Chinese. Another point is that regarding the salary inequality, this is something I thought most people around the world understood, but it happened to be not the case. It is very common that there is a salary difference between domestic and foreign workers. Even among the projects I managed a few years ago, salaries difference between my Chinese partner, and also a European partner, sometimes range from 5 times to 8 times the difference, okay, in the same post. And this is not our partner in Europe overpaying their European employees or the Chinese partner underpaying Chinese employees here in China regarding Chinese projects. This is just, I would say, market equilibrium. Imagine all the Chinese factory workers, assembling the iPhone demand a US level salary. How much do you think you'll be paying for your iPhone or any cell phone, which most of them come from China today? If there are no cell phone factory, no iPhone factory, no Nokia factories in the earlier days in China, will China grow so quickly and catch up to the Western power? So this is just a common strategy, and it just so happened there are salary differences. That's what motivates investment to begin with. And just for reference, the average salary in Niger, if you guys check, online sources, is roughly $100 per month. So the Chinese paying Nigerian employees there $1,200 per month is quite good already by Niger standard. 1,200 is pretty fair even by Chinese standard. And as for Chinese worker, it is normal to overpay them, or else they won't travel to work in Niger to begin with. And many workers, in my opinion, cannot be substituted domestically in order to keep performance and meet project deadlines. I handle this kind of joint projects, and it is quite normal that a Chinese employee who received only a fraction of European employee was able to handle more workload than the European counterpart. So I more or less agree that this is just an excuse to confiscate the Chinese assets. I mean, over a decade of construction and investment, now just 1 year into the operation, the Niger government took everything. So I I don't know what to say, to be honest. I will say that overall, I think it is a mistake for China to invest so heavily in a country like Niger, which had 4 coups in less than 30 years. And there's really no way to secure those investments unless China is going to take the traditional colonial path and use military force, which there are a lot of suggestions like that within the Chinese social media space, something I do not recommend China doing. In addition, leaders in Niger often show a lack of strategic foresight. For example, back in 1992, the leader of Niger decided to switch its diplomatic recognition from China to Taiwan, becoming one of the few African nations to do so at that time, simply because Taiwan gave Niger some funding. And in 1996, after another coup, Niger switched back to China. So very unpredictable foreign policy. I would love to hear some input from my audience, especially from Africa. I want to hear what you guys take on this. What is your opinion on this? And what should China do regarding this kind of practice, and especially this case? I already explained China's position here. You should see this is not China robbing Niger. Do you guys think Niger government should perhaps return the assets to China? Would they do it? Would they just confiscate it for the long run as well? I really thought about this, okay, and I want to give you guys my take. If I am giving Niger's leader advice today, if you, my audience, is Niger's leader, and you confiscated these assets for, in order to improve your country's economic position, here's what I would say to you. All right. If you really want to nationalize these infrastructures, you should offer the Chinese partner a fair compensation. You should hire a team to evaluate the value of these assets, and let's assume it's 5 billion. Okay. And you can offer the Chinese payment over the next 10, 20 years at a fair interest rate in which you will buy these assets from the Chinese. Because China is the biggest investor in Africa, you are already sanctioned by the West, and China probably has more incentive and capability to invest in your country than the rest of the global south combined at the moment. If you just take these assets and offer no compensation, and China pause and stop funding investment and assistance to your country, can the other African neighbors you have fill in the gap? Maybe they can. If so, that's good. If not, you really have to think about whether this move is worth it in the long run. Like many Chinese said, this is an extremely short-sighted move by the Nigerian government, and geopolitics is not about right or wrong. Okay, it emphasizes on decision and consequence. Can Nigeria bear the consequence of this action to make an enemy out of China and also the entire West, which is already dead? If Nigeria is unable to improve the prosperity of its people over a fair amount of time, there might be another coup on the horizon. Final thought here. China faced many incidents like this in Africa, but surely this is the biggest one. We need to judge at a case by case scenario. Okay, there are definitely more trustworthy economies in Africa. Chinese and Africans really need each other in the long run. The Chinese vision of Africa is for it to become more wealthy and productive so the African people can afford to buy more Chinese goods. This requires African countries to become more productive, and to become productive, Africa requires a lot more investment. And China is one of the few players out there that can offer the best package. There are Chinese social media content creators whine about that China should send security forces, military, to Niger and other African countries to safeguard its business there. I have a cousin who runs a logistic company in Africa. From my understanding through him, okay, I've never been to Africa. There are independent security forces operated by a Chinese company, usually to deter local, gangsters, okay? But they're small contractors. You need a whole military base to deter a takeover by the official government or the coup government, whatever you want to put it. On the one hand, maybe that can force the Niger government to think harder before taking harsh action driven by emotion. But that will also let China down the classical colonial path and severely damage Nigeria's sovereignty. It's a double-edged sword, all right? It is funny because if you really put a lot of thoughts to this, is $5 billion a lot of money? Depends on what you compare to, right? China lost, I would say, hundreds of billions of dollars by purchasing, U.S. Treasury bonds and also participating in U.S. financial Ponzi schemes. Maybe China should put a military base on the Manhattan Island, to keep an eyes on those wolf of Wall Street from robbing everybody off.
And believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more. Sound fair enough?
shit. My wife might divorce me, but yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
That's one of the core strategy today of the Belt and Road Initiative. Instead of enriching the elites in US, especially in the financial sector, might as well shower money into the global south and give those poor countries a chance to grow. Help level the playing field. I hope countries in Africa do not waste this opportunity. Now, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video.